Rome, July 1492, the hottest summer anyone in the city could remember. And in the most sacred building in the Christian world, something was rotting. Not a scandal, not a whispered secret, something more immediate than both. A body. The body of the most powerful man alive, the Pope himself. This is the true story of how a pope died, how his body fell apart in front of the entire church, and how one of the most dangerous men in history used that moment to seize the throne of God. Let's start with the man himself. Pope Innocent VIII, born Giovanni Battista Cibo, he was 59 years old in the summer of 1492. He looked like something time had already given up on. He had always been a large man, but whatever dark combination of illness and appetite had been working on him in those final years had pushed him far beyond large. His face had swallowed itself. His hands rested on the table like two pale loaves of bread. When he breathed, you could hear it from across the room, a wet, heavy sound, like water pressing through cracks in rock. His legs had swollen so badly that the skin was beginning to split under the pressure. The doctors called it edema, a dangerous runaway buildup of fluid inside the body. In the July heat of Rome, with no real treatment available and no relief in sight, it was a death sentence. The only question was when. The doctors knew it, the cardinals knew it, the servants knew it. Even the Pope, on some level, knew it. But nobody said it out loud. Because in Rome, in the Vatican, what you said out loud was always less important than what you were planning in silence. And nobody in Rome planned in silence better than Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia. Borgia was 57 years old. He had been playing the game of church politics for 30 years. He arrived at the Pope's private dinner that evening, a gathering of the most powerful cardinals in Christendom, wearing crimson robes that were somehow still immaculate in the July heat. He moved through the room the way a wolf moves through tall grass, quiet, covering ground, watching everything. He took his seat, accepted his wine, and watched the dying man at the head of the table. The table itself was a monument to excess. Whole roasted pigs glazed with honey, carp cooked in wine, towers of candied fruit, gold-rimmed bowls of cream soup, flagons of the best wine Italy could produce. Servants moved silently between the chairs, filling and refilling glasses, wearing the professional blankness of people who understand that the powerful do not commit their sins in front of witnesses they consider real. And the Pope, this swollen, struggling man who could barely draw a breath, ate. That was the thing that had silenced the physicians and disturbed the confessor, and sat quietly in the private thoughts of every cardinal in the room. The man ate like someone who believed that if he could only have enough of something, it might finally be enough. Course after course, methodical, with the focus of a man fulfilling an obligation he doesn't fully understand, but absolutely cannot stop. Across the table, Cardinal della Rovere, sharp-faced, dangerous, and burning with his own ambitions, leaned forward with a smile like honey poured over a blade. "Your Holiness appears to be in considerable comfort this evening," he said. The Pope turned slowly, the way large, tired things turn slowly, and said, "God has blessed me with abundance, Giuliano. I have never found cause to refuse his gifts." Borgia smiled into his wine. A saint's answer, he thought, from a man who hasn't spoken honestly to God in 30 years. He said nothing. He just watched, and he calculated. Down in the kitchen corridors, far below the candlelit dining hall, a young monk named Brother Matteo pressed himself against a cold stone wall and tried not to breathe. He was 22 years old. He'd grown up on a farm in Umbria. He'd been assigned to the Vatican kitchens 6 months ago, and in those 6 months he had learned 3 things: that God is present in small acts of service, that powerful men do not see servants, and that what he had witnessed over the past 2 weeks might get him killed. The physician had come again the night before, Dr. Giacomo di Volterra, a small, dry, careful man who smelled of camphor and never looked directly at anything interesting. He examined the Pope. He left, but in the corridor outside he stopped to speak quietly with the papal chamberlain, and Brother Matteo had been standing very still in a shadow at the time, and he had heard. "The edema worsens," the physician said. "His legs, the pressure of the fluid within is considerable. In this heat I cannot answer for." The chamberlain made a sharp gesture. The doctor's voice dropped below hearing. Matteo stood in his shadow and did not move. He was not a complicated young man. He'd grown up watching animals die, slowly, then all at once. He understood, in the way farm boys understand things that scholars spend careers trying to put into words, that the body has a conversation with the world, and when that conversation turns into an argument, the body always loses in the end. He understood the Pope was dying. What he didn't understand was what would happen next. But he had watched the cardinals watching each other during their visits. He had seen how other animals circle something wounded. He had seen how the circling always tightens at the end. He prayed for the Pope's soul. He also prayed, less quietly, for his own survival. 3 floors above Brother Matteo, Rodrigo Borgia was not praying. He was writing. The letter was addressed to his son, Cesare, who was in Pisa, supposedly studying, actually scheming, in the rough proportion of 1 part scholarship to 4 parts naked ambition. The letter could not survive discovery. Borgia wrote it in a private cipher he had spent 20 years developing, a code he shared with nobody except his son. In plain language, the letter said, "Come home. The moment we have been preparing for may arrive before summer ends. I have the votes, but votes are living things, and living things change their minds. I need you here. Do not bring anything that cannot be explained." He sealed it with plain wax, no signet, no identification, and handed it to a messenger who had been in his service for 20 years and long since learned that asking questions extends your life only in the asking and rarely in the answering. Then Borgia went to his window and looked out at Rome. The city lay below him like a body, massive, ancient, exhausted by its own survival. Torches on the bridge, a dog barking somewhere in the dark, church bells marking the quarter hour. He had been playing this game since before some of these cardinals were ordained. He knew where the bodies were because he had put several of them there. He knew what doors opened with what keys because he had made some of the keys himself. He smiled at the dark city. God, he thought, is watching. He has been watching for 20 years and has not intervened. I take that as approval. June dissolved into July like salt into a wound. The Pope stopped leaving his chambers. Private masses were held at his bedside. Diplomatic visitors came in pairs and left wearing carefully arranged expressions. Concern for a valued leader, relief at being outside, and the particular satisfaction of watching someone else's mortality up close. Cardinal della Rovere visited on a Tuesday. He walked out of the papal apartments with his jaw set like stone, his eyes passing Borgias in the corridor, carrying a message that needed no cipher. "This is happening. We are entering the afterword." Borgia inclined his head. De la Rouvière kept walking. The physicians held a conference on the 15th. Borgia was not invited. He arranged to be in an adjacent room with the door slightly open, a position he had found historically edutational. The doctors spoke in professional Latin, the language of learned men trying to say dangerous things in safe words. Through that careful screen, the facts came through like stones in a shallow river, visible when the water runs low. The facts were these. The fluid inside the papal body had reached a quantity the human form was never designed to contain. The heart was struggling. The skin of the lower legs was beginning to weep at its own seams, unable to hold what was pressing from within. The heat was the deciding factor. Heat and the condition fed each other in a spiral that, the physicians carefully agreed, had a predictable end. July at the latest, Borgia thought, perhaps sooner. He withdrew quietly from his listening position and went to write another letter. This one was to a banker in Florence. He died on the 25th of July. The news came to Cardinal Borgia at the 6th hour of the morning, when the Roman summer light was already coming through his window thick and golden and completely indifferent to everything it touched. The chamberlain who delivered the message had clearly already calculated which power in the room he served, and had concluded that he served primarily the room. Borgia received the news with appropriate gravity. He waited for the chamberlain to leave. He sat quietly for a moment. Then he stood up, walked to his cabinet, poured himself a measure of good Spanish wine, heavy, dark Aragonese, a gift from a grateful archbishop, and drank it slowly at the window, watching Rome begin its day. There was no celebration in him. He was too old and too experienced for celebration, which is the emotion of people who haven't yet learned that what comes after any success is just the next problem. What he felt instead was a kind of cool arrival, the feeling of a man who has been walking to a destination for many years and has finally watched it come into focus. There, that hill, that road. The conclave, he thought. Everything now is the conclave. 11 years I have worked for this. Every favor owed, every secret kept, every letter written in cipher and sent in darkness, all if it points to this week, this vote. De la Rouvière has his allies, I have mine. The difference is that I have been counting both sets, and he has only been counting his own. He finished the wine. He called for his secretaries. The work began. Now, by ancient tradition, the body of a pope had to lie in state for 3 days. The office demanded its dignity regardless of weather, regardless of the state of the remains, regardless of the inconveniences of a Roman July. And this July was not cooperating. It had been, Romans agreed privately and with the particular dark humor of people who have survived everything their city has thrown at them, the hottest summer in living memory. The sun came down like a hammer every morning. The stones of the city held heat through the night and released it slowly, like a miser finally parting with coins. The river smelled of history and worse. Animals moved through the streets with the conserved slowness of creatures managing limited energy against unlimited heat. In the great basilica, in the chapel prepared for the lying in state, candles burned lower than they should. Incense burned constantly. Priests rotated in shifts, maintaining the prayers, the chanting, the unending murmur of the office for the dead, which after 3 days of rotation they had begun to hear even during the silences, beating quietly between heartbeats. The pilgrims came. They always come for a pope lying in state. They came to see in death the man they had never been permitted to see in life, and death gave them the access that life had withheld. There he lay, equal at last, available to the prayers and the tears and the quietly satisfied thoughts of everyone who had ever suffered under the weight of his decisions. Brother Matteo was assigned to assist at the lying in state on the second day. He stood near the coffin and held a candle and prayed for the repose of the Holy Father's soul. He tried not to look at the body. He looked at the body. He had known the Holy Father was a large man. He had carried his trays. He had heard the sounds through the door. But there is a difference between knowing something in the abstract and standing 3 feet from the physical reality of it. And the physical reality of what lay on that catafalque beneath its silks and pable vestments was, he prayed harder. It was on the morning of the 3rd day that the incense became necessary in a way it had not been before. This was not discussed openly. Nothing in the Vatican was discussed openly if it could be avoided, and this particular thing could not be discussed at all. Not among the pilgrims, not among the priests, not among the guards who stood their posts wearing expressions carved from stone and seeing carefully nothing. But among the chamberlains and sacristans and junior clergy who moved through the backstage of the performance, there was a look passing from face to face, a look that contained knowledge and the shared decision to carry that knowledge in silence. The heat had not relented. God had not modified the season for the convenience of papal funerals. The summer pressed down on Rome. The body, despite every preparation the mortuary arts of the age could provide, had begun its own private reckoning with the laws of nature. Laws that acknowledge no title, no vestment, no consecrated ring. The incense burners were refilled 3 times in a single morning. That afternoon, a decision was made by the cardinal in charge of the proceedings, unrecorded in any official document, but understood by everyone who needed to understand it, that the lying in state would end early. The burial would happen immediately. The Pope would be in the ground before evening prayers. Brother Matteo, carrying fresh candles to the chapel, passed a group of chamberlains in a corridor speaking in voices too low to hear. He got fragments. The heat, the physicians, it cannot wait. He understood. He crossed himself and walked faster. What happened next has been described many different ways over the centuries, because human memory rewrites extraordinary events into better stories, and this event needed no improvement. The witnesses who recorded their accounts in the immediate hours and days, and in depositions that historians would eventually find in forgotten Vatican archives, described a sound like a large, overripe fruit dropping from a tree, a soft, muffled concussion, then a smell that no quantity of incense on earth could address, then a collective movement of every person in the chapel toward the exits, not running because the dignity of God's house did not permit running, but moving with a purposeful swiftness that achieved the same result. The body of Pope Innocent VIII, Giovanni Battista Cibo, Vicar of Christ, servant of the servants of God, had, under the combination pressure of a Roman July and its own long years of accumulation, declared its final independence from all the forms that had contained it in life. The silks, the vestments, the careful work of the mortuary artists, all of it bore witness to a truth that power always, eventually, must face. That beneath all the trappings of office, beneath all the authority and the pomp and the accumulated weight of a title, there is only a body, subject to the same pitiless summer as every beggar in the poorest street of the city, subject to the same chemistry as every animal dying in an alley, accountable to the same final democracy that honors no hereditary titles and grants no dispensations. The guards who stayed at their posts did so at considerable personal cost. The cardinal in charge closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and began issuing orders. In the Vatican archives, in boxes that smell of incense and old paper, and the particular mustiness of preserved secrets, there is a document dated July 29, 1492. It records the expenditures related to the papal funeral preparations. Most of it is ordinary: candles, incense, the fees of the mortuary artists, the cost of silk for the vestments. Near the bottom, in a different hand, smaller, more hurried, the hand of a man writing something he wished he could write slowly, there are 3 words in Latin: Procter calorem estivum, because of the summer heat. After those words, the cost of cleaning the chapel. It is a large number. The conclave opened on the 6th of August. 23 cardinals filed into the Sistine Chapel, the chapel that Della Rovere's own uncle had built and named, and the doors were sealed behind them in the ancient way. White smoke for a new pope, black smoke for no decision. The world would wait. Borgia sat in his place. He looked at the ceiling. He thought of nothing in particular, a skill that he had taken 40 years to develop. The ability to clear the mechanism before you need it, to arrive at the moment of maximum consequence in a state of perfect calm. Not the calm of someone who doesn't care, but the calm of someone who has cared so precisely for so long that preparation has finally become something resembling peace. The first ballot, inconclusive, black smoke. Borgia moved through the careful conversations of the days that followed with the economy of motion that separates masters from practitioners. No wasted words, no unnecessary display, just the precise application of exactly what was needed, exactly where it was needed. He paid close attention to Cardinal Sforza, who had not yet fully committed, and who, in his younger years, had taken out a loan from a banking concern Borgia was connected to, a loan that had never quite been resolved. He paid close attention to Cardinal Orsini, who wanted a bishopric for his nephew. He read the body language of the men around Della Rovere and found there the text of their uncertainties. The second ballot, closer. That night, in the sealed darkness of the Sistine Chapel, listening to the breathing of 22 other men, Rodrigo Borgia thought of his father, a minor Valencian nobleman with enormous ambition and insufficient means, who died before seeing what that ambition could accomplish when it had 60 years and enough resources to work with. For you, old man, he thought, no sentiment, just acknowledgement. And for Cesare, and for the family, and, let's not pretend otherwise, for myself. The fourth ballot produced the answer. Rodrigo Borgia was elected Pope. He took the name Alexander VI. Across the chapel, Cardinal Della Rovere received the news with a face from which every expression had been surgically removed. He applauded with the others. He offered his congratulations with the others. Only his eyes said what they said, and only Borgia was watching, and only Borgia understood the sentence written in them. This is not over. Borgia smiled back at him with all the warmth of a man who has won and knows it. No, he agreed privately, it is not over. Nothing is ever over. But for now, for this particular evening, in this particular sealed room, I have won, and you have lost, and the next moves belong to me. Down in the kitchen, Brother Matteo heard the bells. The bells of Rome rang the way they always rang when a new pope was chosen, in cascading, overlapping patterns that the different churches had developed over centuries into something like a conversation. St. Peter's beginning, Santa Maria Maggiore answering, then the smaller churches joining from every direction until the whole city rang like a struck instrument, like something enormous had been set in motion, like the world had shifted on its axis to accommodate a new center of gravity. He set down his knife. He wiped his hands on his habit. He looked up at the ceiling as if he could see through stone and history and all the floors beneath to whatever was happening in the chapel above. He didn't know who had been elected. He'd find out in the morning when the news ran through Rome like water through dry earth. He knew only this: a seat had been filled. The process that had begun with a smell in a corridor and ended with something he refused to name had produced, as it always produced, a successor. The church continued. The world turned. He picked up the knife. He went back to peeling the onions.
They buried Pope Innocent VIII in haste as the heat demanded. The records of his burial are brief, briefer than the burials of far lesser men, because the clerks who kept the Vatican records had learned, as clerks always learn, what to write down and what to allow silence to hold. Cardinal della Rova went into voluntary exile within the year. He spent 11 years cataloguing his grievances and sharpening his plans, and returned eventually as Pope Julius II, the Pope who commissioned Michelangelo, rebuilt the Great Basilica, and spent his entire pontificate methodically dismantling everything Borgia had constructed. History is a long game, and its players must be patient. Cesare Borgia came home. He came home and became, in the years that followed, something that historians have argued about for 5 centuries: monster, genius, the model from which Machiavelli drew his prince, a man who understood power with the cold clarity of a surgeon and was as willing as a surgeon to cut where cutting was necessary. His father watched him with the complicated pride of a man who has created something that exceeded his own design. He watched him until the fever took him, until Borgia himself fell into the same democracy that had taken Innocent, the democracy of the body, which accepts no exceptions, honors no titles, and eventually comes for everyone. Brother Matteo served in the Vatican for 30 more years. He rose to sacristan, then to prior of a small monastery in the Umbrian hills, not far from where he was born. He was known in his later years as a man of quiet holiness who could be called upon to sit with the dying and did so without flinching. He was known for his patience, his stillness, and for a quality his fellow monks described as watchfulness, the sense that he had seen something at some point that had taught him to look at the world clearly. He never spoke of what he had seen. He never forgot it. The summer of 1492 ended as summers do. The heat broke in September. Rain came down on Rome the way autumn rain comes, long, thorough, patient, washing the streets and the stones and the ancient facades, carrying whatever the summer had left behind down to the river, and from the river to the sea. The new pope celebrated his first public mass. The city performed its celebrations. The banners went up, the bells rang, the pilgrims came. In the Sistine Chapel, on a ceiling that had not yet been painted, God had not yet reached toward Adam, and Adam had not yet reached back. That moment, that gap between the fingers, that space that is not emptiness but potential, not absence but the instant before contact, was still years away. Michelangelo was 17 that summer in Florence, learning to see. But Rome breathed. The candles burned. History continued.